Chapter 4, Revenues and Other Receipts. In this chapter, you are expected to be able to state the sources of revenue of a government entity, state the recognition and measurement of revenue. Section 44 of Book 6 of the 1987 Administrative Code provides for the accrual of revenue collected by the national government to the unappropriated surplus of the general fund, such the unless otherwise specifically provided by law, all income accruing to the department, offices, and agencies by virtue of the provision of existing laws, orders, and regulations shall be deposited in the National Treasury or in the duly authorized depositary bank of the government. So let us first discuss the receipts, income collections, and deposit system. So this system covers the processes of acknowledging and reporting income or collections, deposits of collections with the authorized government depositary bank, or through the authorized government depositary bank for the account of the Treasurer of the Philippines, and recording of collections and deposits in the books of accounts of the agency. In the receipt of or in the collection of these income and revenues, the following fundamental principles are followed. First, all revenues of an entity shall be remitted to the National Treasury and included in the general fund of the national government, unless otherwise allowed or specifically allowed by another law. Second, all monies and property received by a public officer acting in capacity or upon any occasion shall be accounted for as government funds and property unless another law specifically states otherwise. Pangatlo, amounts received in trust and from business type activities of the government may be separately recorded and disbursed in accordance with relevant rules. Next, receipts shall be recorded as revenue of special, fiduciary, or trust funds or funds other than the general fund only when authorized by law. A collecting office shall immediately issue an official receipt upon collecting a payment of any nature. Next, where mechanical devices such as electronic official receipt are used to acknowledge cash receipts, the Commission on Audit may approve upon request the exemption from the use of accountable forms. Next, temporary receipts shall never be used to acknowledge the receipt of public funds. Pre-numbered official receipts, or ORs, shall be issued in strict numerical sequence. Duplicate copies shall be the exact copies of the original. A collecting officer shall accept payments to the government in the form of checks upon proper endorsement and identification of the payee or endorsee. The collecting officer shall not use government funds to encash private checks. And lastly, receipts of government funds shall be acknowledged in accordance with the law indicating the date of receipt, from whom, and in what account the fund was received. So these are the fundamental principles followed in the receipt of revenue for the government agencies. Before we proceed doon sa ating different items of revenue, let us first distinguish yung tinatawag nating income and revenue in the perspective of government accounting. So the terms income and revenue are oftentimes used interchangeably. Both terms represent gross accretion of funds to provide the means to carry out the programs, the projects, and the activities of the government. However, in the government accounting, the term income is more broader than revenue. Government income represents all funds received by the government from taxes, grants, aids, and borrowings, while government revenue represent funds which do not increase any liabilities of the government. So, ibig sabihin, yung loans and borrowings that are received by the government agencies, these are not classified as revenue, but rather they are accounted for as income. So taxes are both income and revenue. Therefore, income encompasses revenue. Again, mas broad yung scope ng income as compared to revenue. But in this discussion, we will focus on the revenues and other receipts of the government. So we have the following two general classifications of revenue. Namely, we first have tax revenue. So, tax revenue, ano ba ito? So, this account classification encompasses all taxes imposed on taxable income properties and use of use or sale of goods and services, taxes on international trade, and, transactions and other taxes, including fines and penalties. Also included under these accounts are the revenue generated from local government, schools, and hospital operations. So we have here specific items of tax revenue. So again, meron tayong two general classifications of revenue. First is the tax revenue. And ito yung specific line items of tax revenue. We have tax revenue from individual and corporation, which may came from income tax, professional tax, travel tax, immigration tax, tax revenue for property in the form of estate tax, donors tax, capital gains tax revenue from goods and services, import duties, excise tax, business tax on sand, gravel, and other quarry products, tax on delivery vans and trucks, tax revenue, others classification, coming from documentary stamp tax, motor vehicles, user's charge, and other taxes. And lastly, tax revenue from fines and penalties, composing of taxes on individual and corporation, property taxes, taxes on goods and services, and other taxes. So the second general classification of revenue is the general income. So ano naman tong general income as compared to tax revenue? So this account classification encompasses all types of revenue generated by government agencies in the exercise of their administrative and regulatory function. Income from public enterprises, investments, and income from grants and donations, including subsidies. So ano-ano ba yung mga specific line item of revenue under the general income classification? We have revenue from service and business income, permit fees, registration plates, tags and stickers fees, clearance and certification fees, franchising fees, licensing fees, supervision and regulation, enforcement fees, spectrum usage fees, legal fees, inspection fees, verification and authentication fees, passport and visa fees, processing fees, fines and penalties from service income and other service income. So other than service and business income, we also have line items under business income as follows: assistance and subsidy, shares, grants and donations, and other non-operating income. So again, those are the two general classification of revenue: tax revenue and then the general income. So all of these items of revenue may arise from these what we call exchange transactions and non-exchange transactions. So let us differentiate the two. So when we say exchange transactions, this refer doon sa transactions in which one entity receives assets or services or they has liabilities extinguished and directly gives approximately equal value to another entity in exchange. So sa exchange transaction, there is a reciprocal transfer. Okay? Kung mabalikan yung ating basic accounting, ito yung transaction wherein meron tayong yung tinatawag na value received and value parted with. Ibig sabihin, may approximate equal value yung exchange between two parties. As compared to exchange transaction, non-exchange transaction naman, these are the non-reciprocal transfers. Ibig sabihin, these are the transactions in which an entity either receives value from another entity without directly giving approximately equal value in exchange. Ano ba example nito? Tax revenue, fines and penalties, and donations. While sa exchange transactions, examples are the sales of goods and rendering of services. So how do we account all these revenues arising from exchange and non-exchange transactions? We have the following methods of accounting for income. Meron tayong tatlo. First, the accrual method, which is familiar na rin kayo since yan yung basis of accounting natin, accounting basis natin from your basic accounting to your financial accounting. Aside from accrual method, allowed sa government accounting ang tinatawag nating modified accrual and cash basis. So, modified accrual, ano ba yung meron sa modified accrual? Under this method, income of the agency is recorded as deferred credits to income. And the appropriate receivable account is debited. The income account is recognized upon receipt of collection, and the deferred credits to income account is adjusted accordingly. So, meron tayo nung liability account, prior to receipt ng income. So, the income is recognized in the deferred credits to income account, which is a liability account. So, upon receipt ng income, so this deferred credits to income account is adjusted naman accordingly. While on the cash basis, so this method shall be used for all other taxes, fees, charges, and other revenue where accrual method is impractical. Okay? The income account is credited upon collection of the cash or its equivalent. So, if you can observe, this is one of the differences of government accounting with private business accounting. So, the Philippine Public Sector Accounting Standards, which is a standard followed in the government accounting, allows the use of modified accrual and cash basis accounting for income or for revenue. While yung ating Philippine Accounting Standards or the PAS, which is used in the private business accounting, only allows accrual method of accounting for income. So, ito yung iba't ibang methods natin of accounting for income. So, the method of accounting will depend doon sa nature na ng ating item of income or item of revenue. So, when do we recognize these revenues? So, na-identify natin earlier, ano-ano ba yung iba't ibang types of revenues that may be earned or may be received by a government agency. So, ang tanong, when do we recognize these revenues? So, the point of recognition ng revenue natin will depend upon the nature of the revenue. So, certain conditions must first be satisfied for an item of revenue to be recognized. Like for example, in the revenue of sale of goods, so the following conditions must first be satisfied for the revenue from the sale of goods be recognized. So dapat significant reason rewards of ownership of the goods are transferred to the buyer. The entity does not retain continuing managerial involvement or effective control over the goods sold. It is probable that the economic benefits will flow to the entity. Revenue can be measured reliably, and cost relating to the transaction can be measured reliably. So, meron tayong, kumbaga, ito yung ating earning process. So, dapat masatisfy muna yung ating conditions as follows para yung item of revenue arising from sale of goods ay recognize natin as revenue. On the sale of services naman, or in the rendering of services, so revenue from supply of services is recognized on a straight line basis over the period of the services rendered. However, revenue is recognized by reference to the stage of completion. Just like for example, percentage of completion method, if the outcome of the transaction can be estimated reliably, such as when all of the following conditions are satisfied. The stage of completion of the transaction at the reporting date can be measured reliably. It is probable that the economic benefits will flow to the entity. revenue can be measured reliably, and the cost relating to the transaction can be measured reliably. So normally, a government entity recognizes revenue from service income when the services are rendered. So yun naman talaga yung usual na ginagawa natin. I-recognize lang natin siya as income when the services have been rendered already. Kaso nga lang, may mga exception tayo kasi there are cases na hindi practicable na i-recognize yung revenue on the once na ma-render na yung service. So, in these exceptions, revenue is recognized when fees are collected or yung tinatawag na cash basis of recognizing na tayo of income. So, similarly, revenue from business income is recognized when fees are billed or if not practicable, when fees are collected. So, depende. Depende doon sa practicability nung recognition ng ating service income. On the other hand naman, for non-exchange transactions like taxes, fines and penalties, gifts and donations, and goods or services in kind, the revenue are recognized on a cash basis until a reliable measurement model is developed. So once na yung items of revenue natin, they are eligible na to be recognized as revenue, so yung next step natin is yung determination ng measurement niya. So how do we measure these items of revenue or revenues? So the measurement of revenue from exchange transactions, so yung measurement natin will depend whether the revenue arises from exchange transaction or whether these revenues arises from non-exchange transactions. So if the revenue arises from exchange transactions, so these revenues are measured at the fair value of the consideration received or receivable. And when we say fair value, it is the amount for which an asset could be exchanged or a liability settled between knowledgeable willing parties in an arm's length of transaction. While for non-exchange transactions, assets, liabilities, and revenues arising from a non-exchange transactions are measured as follows. For the asset, so it is measured at the acquisition date fair value. For the liabilities, at the present value when the effective time value of money is material. And for the revenue, at the amount of increase in net assets if non-exchange transactions is initially recognized as a liability, the subsequent reduction in that liability, like for example, because the condition is satisfied, is recognized as revenue. So in conjunction with the recording of these revenues, let us discuss the different types of collection. So meron tayong iba't ibang types ng collection. And the following are the policies for the following types of collections as to authority of use. So ito yung iba't iba natin ito yung different types of collections natin. Kasi yung revenue that may be collected by the government agencies, yung authority as to use ng revenue may vary. Kasi yung collection natin may be without authority to use, pwede ring with authority to use, or with authority pero with limitations, or yung collections natin may come from income from sale of equipment, grants and donations intended for agency use, or from miscellaneous collections. So let us differentiate these types of collections. So kapag sinabi natin without authority to use, ibig sabihin yung government agency mere collecting agency lang siya or mere collecting agent lang siya ng national government. Ibig sabihin, kumukolekta siya ng revenue pero hindi siya authorized to use that revenue in its operation. So yung general rule natin sa lahat ng revenue natin, yung general rule is all revenue, regardless of amount and frequency of collection, such as income taxes, taxes on goods and services, motor vehicle registration fees, operating and service income, borrowings and interest earned. As a general rule, they are to be remitted to the National Treasury. Okay? Di ba, one of the principle natin yan, one of the fundamental principle of revenue. Collection natin yon na lahat ng collection shall be remitted to the National Treasury. So, such income shall be recorded by the collecting agency in a separate books of accounts called the National Government Books. So, the collection shall be credited to income of the collecting agency and shall be debited upon remittance to the National Treasury. So, bigyan natin ng example. So, again, this, nasa ano pa lang tayo? Collections ng collection of revenue ng government agency wherein wala silang authority to use such collection. So, for the illustration, let's say, for example, during the tax season of 2019, the Bureau of Internal Revenue made collections in the amount of 100 million, which was accordingly remitted to the Bureau of Treasury. So, how do we record the receipt of tax revenue? As well as how do we record the remittance of this collection to the Bureau of Treasury? So, to record the collections made by the Bureau of Internal Revenue, so again, kapag ang collections is without authority to use, yung collections is ni-record ng government agency sa separate books of accounts, which is the National Government Books. Okay? So, sa National Government Books ng BIR, the collection of the 100 million tax revenue is recorded as follows. We debited cash collecting officers for the receipt of 100 million and then credit yung revenue account, which is income tax, 100 million. So, yung for our future exercises, so the purpose na meron tayong revised chart of accounts na pwede nyo makita doon sa ating GAM volume 3. Sa GAM volume 3 natin, provided doon yung revised chart of account. So doon lahat ng listing ng account names na gagamitin natin with their corresponding RCA code or the revised chart of accounts code. So, yung lahat ng ginamit ko dito sa presentation natin is based doon sa ating revised chart of accounts as provided by the GAM. Okay? So, ito yung pag-record natin ng collection of the tax revenue. So, once na na-remit na ni BIR yung tax revenue collected, papunta sa Bureau of Treasury, ang magiging entry sa books ni BIR is actually reversal lang nung naging entry niya nung collection. Kasi ultimately, hindi kasi siya talaga revenue ni BIR. Ang nangyari doon, collecting agent lang siya ng national government, which ultimately lahat ng collection ng national government mapupunta sa Bureau of Treasury. Kaya nga mini-maintain yung recording ng collections or ng revenue which are hindi authorized yung agency to use yung revenue is recorded sa national government books. Kasi yung item of revenue is attributable sa national government. Hindi siya, parang in essence, hindi siya revenue nung government agency. Ano lang siya, naging collecting agent lang siya, parang dumaan lang sa kanya yung collection, pero ultimately, yung collection is sa national government. Kaya, kung mapapansin nyo, reversal lang yung nagiging entry nung collection once na niremit yung collection papunta doon sa Bureau of Treasury. So, ito yung entry ng remittance ng revenue from the government agency which is BIR papunta sa Bureau of Treasury. So, ano na may entry sa book ng Bureau of Treasury once na na-receive niya yung remittance ni BIR? So, yung entry doon debit ni Bureau of Treasury yung cash in bank local currency savings account while crediting income tax. So ultimately, ang nakapag-recognize nung revenue is the Bureau of Treasury upon remittance sa kanya nung tax. So, ano yung pinagkaiba ng collections without authority to use with collections with authority to use? So, agencies which are authorized to use income for their operations shall record their collections as income in the regular agency books. So, ito yung pinagkaiba kanina. Kanina, kapag ang collections ng government agency is without authority to use, yung collection shall be recorded sa national government books. While yung collections ng government agencies na with authority to use, they shall be recorded, yung collection shall be recorded as income doon sa regular agency books ng government agency. Ibig sabihin, kanya yung income or kanya yung revenue. So the said authority may be lifted from the special provisions of the General Appropriations Act, from the Permanent Committee pursuant to the requirements of the General Provisions of the GAA, or from the special laws. So since said collections may be used by the agency for their operations, no journal entry shall be recorded by the Bureau of Treasury in its books for this particular transaction. Kasi yung collection na with authority to use, hindi siya nire-remit sa Bureau of Treasury. Kasi merong laws that allow, like for example, the General Appropriation Act. So these are the examples of the laws that allows the government agency to utilize yung collections nila ng revenue. So, meron tayong illustration dito. So, say for example, the agency XYZ of the national government issued a bill for the rent of an office space of its building in the amount of 50,000. Upon receipt of the rent payment, agency XYZ remitted the amount received in its depositary bank. Of the amount deposited, agency XYZ used 10,000 for the repair of the same office space. So, ano yung magiging journal entries natin with this illustration or with this example? So, first, record natin yung issuance of bill for the rent of an office space. So, for the issuance of bill, ibig sabihin kapag issuance pa lang ng billing, ibig sabihin wala pang collection. Sinisingil mo pa lang. Kaya ang entry natin sa debit to receivable, accounts receivable, and the corresponding credit to the revenue account, which is the rent or lease income. So after issuance ng bill, na binil mo na yung tenant doon sa office space. So next doon is yung collection. Kasi nga binil mo, magbabayad na sila. So how do we record collection of rent payment? Debit to cash collecting officers with credit to accounts receivable. And yung after collection, ano nga daw yung nangyari? Dineposit ni agency XYZ yung amount doon sa kanyang depository bank. So, na-entry natin to record the deposit in the bank. So, debit tayo sa cash in bank local currency current account with credit to cash collecting officers. And after nun, nagbayad or ginamit ni agency XYZ yung 10,000 for the repair of the office space. So, ang debit natin doon, repairs and maintenance, building and other structures with corresponding credit to cash in bank, local currency current account. So, pangatlong type ng collection natin is collections with authority but with limitation. So if the authority is subject to limitations that any excess collection shall be remitted to the National Treasury, such as collections from seminar and convention fees, the same shall be recorded in the regular agency books. Okay? So katulad nung type of collections na with authority to use, yung items of revenue which is may authority din yung agency but is subject to limitation. So this collection shall be recorded then sa regular agency book. Okay? So the expenses shall be journalized while the excess shall be remitted to the National Treasury and transferred to the National Government Book. So yung excess lang nung or yung limitation lang ng authority, kung hanggang saan yung limitation, yung sobra ng collection shall be remitted to the National Treasury, and yung amount of remittance na yun yung ito-transfer sa National Government Books. So meron tayong illustration dito. Let's say for example, si Agency ABC conducted a seminar about the train law. So the agency collected a total amount of 20,000, which was deposited with Agency Depositary Bank, and paid the following expenses of the seminar. Nagbayad ng office supplies, 5,000, rent, 3,000, printing and binding, 1,000, and the excess of the amount collected was appropriately remitted to the National Treasury. So how do we record this transaction? So first, record natin yung collection ng seminar fee. So for the collection ng seminar fee, we debit cash collecting officer, 20,000, credit to seminar training fees. Okay? After ng collection ng seminar fees, dineposit yung collection sa depository bank ni agency ABC. So to record the deposit of collections, debit tayo cash in bank, local currency, current account, we record it to cash collecting officers. After nun, may mga binayaran na expenses. So, debit lang tayo nung expenses, recognize natin expenses through debiting the corresponding expenses with the credit to cash and bank. And yung authority kasi doon sa collection is for the payment lang nung expenses related to the seminar. So, the excess of the collection over the expenses shall be remitted to the Bureau of Treasury. Okay? So, how do we record the remittance sa Bureau of Treasury? So, first, transfer muna natin yung excess ng collection over dun sa expenses papunta sa National Government Books. Okay? So, paano natin i-record yung transfer no excess papunta sa National Government Book? So, ito yung pag-record doon sa regular agency book. Debit natin, i-credit natin yung i-reverse lang yung entry natin kanina. Credit yung seminar and training fees with the credit debit with the credit doon sa ating expense accounts and sa cash in bank account. So yun yung entry sa regular agency book. So ito naman yung entry sa national government books. So ang matitira na lang is yung excess. Okay? The amount to be transferred in the national government books is the net of yung ating expenses. Okay? So, again, yung amount na i-transfer natin sa national government books, this correspond doon sa amount to be remitted doon sa national or sa Bureau of Treasury. So, the amount to be remitted sa Bureau of Treasury is 11,000. So, since na-transfer na natin yung amount to be remitted sa National Government Books, pwede natin i-remit doon sa Bureau of Treasury. So, ito yung entry sa National Government Books ng Agency ABC for the remittance doon sa excess of the collection. Ito yon. Credit natin yung seminar and training fees with the with the credit to cash and bank. And yung entry sa books ng Bureau of Treasury, cash and bank, local currency, current account, and seminar and training fees na credit. So again, lahat ng remittance papunta sa Bureau of Treasury, ultimately, Bureau of Treasury ang nag-recognize ng revenue na yun. So ito yung example for types of collection na merong authority yung agency to use yung collection pero merong limitation. So yung collection ng revenue natin or ng government agency, pwede rin manggaling from income from sale of equipment. So, proceeds from sale of non-serviceable, obsolete, and other unnecessary equipment, including cars, vans, and the like, may be deemed automatically appropriated for the purchase of new ones and for the repair or maintenance of existing vital equipment. So, it should be noted that the purchase of cars and vans subject to prior authority required under the existing rules. So, say for example, Agency A of the national government sold a non-serviceable car with the following information. Yung cost nung car na binenta is 300,000 with accumulated depreciation of 150,000 and nabenta yung car na yon at sales price of 200,000. So, the proceeds from the sale were accordingly remitted to the National Treasury through the bank. The agency eventually received a special allotment release order or the SARO in the amount of 450,000, which is net of the withholding tax of 50,000. So after the approval of the purchase order issued, the motor vehicle was delivered and accordingly paid in full, net of withholding tax. So the said tax was afterwards remitted to the Bureau of Internal Revenue through a tax remittance advice. So, paano yung pag-record natin nung transaction na ito? First, record natin yung sale of motor vehicle. Again, naibenta yung car costing 300,000 with accumulated debt of 150,000 at an amount of 200,000. So, how do we record the sale of motor vehicle? We debit the amount of cash received, 200,000, while recognizing yung binenta natin ng sasakyan. So, in the recognition of the car, we debit the accumulated depreciation and credit the motor vehicle at the acquisition cost. It's 300,000. So, meron tayong na-recognize na gain on sale from this sale of the car or the sale of the PPE amounting to 50,000. So, this collection, income from sale of equipment, is to be remitted sa Bureau of Treasury. Kaya yung receipt of collection or receipt of income from the sale of equipment is to be recorded sa national government books. Okay? Pero usually kasi ang nangyayari, yung receipt of income from sale of equipment is automatically or eventually nare-receive nung agency as SARO for the purpose of buying new one or for expenses related to repairs ng motor vehicle din. Okay? So, how do we record the remittance of collection ni Agency A papunta sa Bureau of Treasury to the bank? So, debit natin yung gain on sale, 50,000. Debit sa accumulated surplus, 150,000. And then, credit to cash collecting officers amounting to 200,000. So, mapapansin nyo, ang dinebit natin na accumulated surplus correspond doon sa depreciation expense recognized over the useful years na nagamit yung car prior doon sa pagbenta or pagdispose. And on the books of the Bureau of Treasury, the receipt of the income from sale of equipment is as follow: debit cash in bank, local currency savings account, with a credit to gain on sale of PPE and a credit to accumulated surplus or deficit. So, the SARO, once na-release na yung special allotment release order, so this will be recorded sa Registry of Allotment and Obligation Capital Outlay kasi yung object of expenditure nung allotment is for the purchase of new vehicle or new car. Kaya siya sa capital outlay. So, to record the receipt of notice of cash allocation, net of tax remittance advice. So, debit cash, MDS, or Modified Disbursement System regular, for 50,000 with credit to subsidy from national government for 50,000. And to record the accounts payable for the motor vehicle delivered, so ito ay nag-enter into contract, na-deliver na yung vehicle pero hindi pa nababayaran. So, we set up the liability account, accounts payable, 500,000. So, once na binayaran yung liability or yung obligation, syempre, mawawala na yung accounts payable, will credit to, due to BIR, credit to cash, MDS of 450,000. Lastly, remit yung tax na winildowed natin amounting to 50,000 through tax remittance advice. So again, yung sistema ng ating tax remittance advice is yung tax remittance natin through TRA is in essence wala talagang flow ng cash. So ang nangyayari dito, nagkakaroon lang ng advice na nag-withheld si Agency A amounting to 50,000 amount of tax, and ang nangyayari, nagiging another form of NCA siya. Kasi pwedeng gamitin ni Agency A yung winidheld niya na 50,000 for operation ng agency. Also, yung collection ng revenue may came from grants and donations intended for agency. So, say for example, Agency B of the national government received grant from the Canadian International Development Agency in the amount of 100,000, and then remit yung collection sa National Treasury to the bank. So eventually, the agency prepared and submitted a special budget for training and seminar of its employees to the DBM. So upon approval of the special budget, si Agency B naka-receive ng SARO amounting to 100,000, and yung notice of cash allocation ay na-receive of the same amount. So, pag-record natin dito, record natin yung receipt of grant from the area agency. So, debit cash collecting officer with credit to income from grants and donations in cash. After recording nung collection or receipt, record natin yung remittance to the Bureau of Treasury to the bank. So, sa book ni Agency B, which is the National Government Books, again, reversal lang nung entry during the receipt. While sa book ni Bureau of Treasury, debit cash in bank, credit to income from grants and donations in cash. For the receipt of the SARO naman, so the SARO will be posted sa uh, Registry of Allotment and Obligation, maintenance, and other operating expenses. So, sarawan mo siya. So, to record the notice of allocation received, debit tayo ng cash, credit to subsidy from national government.